There is no good or bad food. There are better choices and healthier choices. But when we classify food as good or bad, just like you said, we start to feel good or bad ourselves. And there's a lot of shame wrapped up in that. So that's why I try to tell all my clients to move away from those labels. And if you had a food that you might have, in the past considered to be quote unquote bad, then instead of placing judgment on it and saying, you know what, I was so bad yesterday, I had a cheat day, I really overdid it, and I really felt just so badly about myself. Instead, look at it from a place of learning and look at it from a place of non-judgment and say, all right, yesterday, you know what, I really overate, I had a lot of mindless eating and I had a lot of junk yesterday, more than I wanted to. And let's learn from it. Why did that happen? Did that happen because you were stressed? Your kids were driving you crazy. You didn't eat lunch and you were starving.
I'm your host, Kim Hines, and welcome to the Emotional Eats podcast. I'm on a mission to show you that what you consume, not just the food, affects your entire life. Midlife is different. Let's dig into the real reasons why you eat when you're not hungry and why you're not feeling well. My guests and I are going to give you doable solutions and help you let go of perfectionism, food rules, and stress to make changes that will last a lifetime. If you're ready to ditch old school diet culture and nourish your entire life, this is the show for you. Welcome to episode 62 of the Emotional Eats podcast. As women over 40, or if you're in your 50s like me, we've been given advice for over 30 years on dieting, nutrition, and how to eat. So I'm excited to introduce Alyson Small, who's a registered dietitian and diabetes educator, to give us a more refreshing way to look at food and having a sustainable plan for our weight. Alyson highlights a lot of challenges that we face, such as caretaking, being a mom, juggling lots of roles, emotional eating, and the pressure to be perfect. And she shares in this episode how to gradually make lifestyle changes rather than aiming to be perfect all the time, because that's what a diet is. And we discuss some hot topics like intermittent fasting and the weight loss drugs. And Alyson gives us her take on it. And I always love to ask my guests what they think about some of the things that are trending now. And throughout the interview, Alyson emphasizes meeting women where they are. So this episode, you get to start where you are, find balance, and learn how to develop healthy, sustainable food practices so that you have a great relationship with food, self-compassion, and you can move at a comfortable pace. And remember to be flexible with yourself and give yourself grace. Enjoy the show. Hey, Alyson, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really excited. I'll tell the listeners, if you have been here since the beginning, you may remember my very first episode was actually on intuitive eating. But as I've gone along in season 1 of this podcast, I have really been looking at trying to find a way between that intuitive eating and flexible eating and really nourishing our bodies the right way and trying to find that overlap. And I found it because, Alyson, you're the person that can talk about all of that. So I'm excited today.
I'm so excited to speak about both intuitive eating and finding that way, like you said, to really nourish your body and finding a starting point. Because I think how we discussed a couple weeks ago, intuitive eating is the goal, but it's really hard for people to start off there. So I'm excited to speak with you about the process.
Oh, I think that's going to be great. So I want to start first with you, though. So, Alyson, what along in your life, like what was happening that made you decide to go down the road of becoming a registered dietitian? And I'm really curious, was it not, I kind of want to know the background, how you got there, but was there anything personal that also brought you to this point?
Sure, that's a great question, and I get it a lot. So my mom, I think we spoke about this also, is a type 1 diabetic. So I grew up with her kind of always going to these classes about learning about nutrition and how to balance her insulin with the carbohydrates that she ate. And I always thought it was very interesting. I was always very into sciences. So it seemed just like a natural fit. So that really was one of the big motivating factors for me. Also, I definitely went through a phase where my eating was definitely not very balanced. And, I was able to go through that journey and figure out how to get to a place where I was a lot more healthy and well balanced with both my mindset and my food. And I think that is the most important piece because so many of us are one way or another. And it's very hard to come to that middle point where we have a balanced mindset around food. There's no foods that are good or bad. This is my belief. And this is sort of what I tell all my clients. Um, and, it's a journey to get there. And I think it's very hard to have this healthy relationship with food based on so many different factors, based on how you were raised, what magazines you read or what was exposed, what you were exposed to. Nowadays, forget it. Our kids, I feel like, don't have a chance between TikTok and Instagram and constantly taking selfies and looking at their face all day. So I think that everyone, through their own personal story, has their own baggage that they have when it comes to food and their relationship to their body. And I think it's something that we're always, myself included, constantly working on. And I'm always looking to help my clients find that balance, that healthier mindset, and that better relationship with food and their body.
That's wonderful. And I really like how you mentioned that there are no good or bad foods. I think when we label our food good or bad, we actually are judging ourselves good or bad also. And I'm sure you've had clients like I have where they come in and they say, "Oh, it was so bad yesterday." And I'm like, you're not really bad. It's, how you eat is no reflection on you as a person.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. I tell my clients that all of the time, that there is no good or bad food. There are better choices and healthier choices. But when we classify food as good or bad, just like you said, we start to feel good or bad ourselves. And there's a lot of shame wrapped up in that. So that's why I try to tell all my clients to move away from those labels. And if you had a food that you might have, in the past considered to be quote unquote bad, then instead of placing judgment on it and saying, I was so bad yesterday, I had a cheat day, I really overdid it, and I really felt just so badly about myself. Instead, look at it from a place of learning and look at it from a place of non-judgment and say, all right, yesterday, I really overate, I had a lot of mindless eating and I had a lot of junk yesterday, more than I wanted to. And let's learn from it. Why did that happen? Did that happen because you were stressed? Your kids were driving you crazy. You didn't eat lunch and you were starving. I mean, there's so many different reasons why that could have happened, but placing judgment and shame on it is never going to help you move in the right direction. So instead of coming from a place of judgment, good or bad, let's look at it from a place of learning. So for the next time, we can build those skills to prevent you from overeating and, not physically feeling good after that happens.
oh, yes. There are so many reasons why people are overeating and mindlessly eating, and we're definitely going to get into some of those things. So, for midlife women who are coming in, so we have the women over 40, which is mostly our audience. What
Mhm.
are the top couple reasons people are coming to see you?
So people are primarily coming because they have gained weight, whether it's perimenopause, after menopause, they find that the weight has just really creeped on and they feel hopeless. They feel like they've tried to do it on their own and they haven't been successful. So they're coming to me to kind of create that accountability and that guidance and that structure. So weight loss is definitely the reason people are picking up the call and making the appointment. There's a lot of underlying things they also want to work on, and that is relationship with food and relationship with their body and mindset and having just freedom of not thinking about food all day long. It occupies some people's minds all day when they're trying to lose weight, if they feel guilty, if, how can I eat as little as possible to get me through the day? And then guess what happens? You're thinking about food all day long and it's going to backfire later in the day and you're going to end up overeating. So, just being consumed by food, but all these are underlying issues, but what makes them pick up the phone typically is the fact that they're really looking to lose weight.
Yes, I think that's the biggest thing. People are equating health with that weight loss, but they're also just so shocked by the changes that are happening in their bodies and, wanting to be back in something they had before. But it is in perimenopause, the weight gain, unless you understand that you are in perimenopause, it's so unexplained at first and it's so shocking. But I also think that we've grown up not always having all the facts. And I really love that you can share some things about food that we really, for the longest time, we've been fed some stories about food and myths about food. And so, what are some of those things that we have been fed for so long that we believed that were one not helping our bodies, our metabolisms, and they were actually going against us? But we were pretty much told, "Hey, this is the way. This is the way you're going to lose weight."
Yeah. So there are so many, and I think they change constantly. So I grew up, you know, in the 80s, and then it was like diet, 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 tab. Well, tab was diet, but like anything diet, Dexatrin, whatever that was, that was the culture. And then in the 90s, it was all about the sugar, as much sugar as you can, as long as there's no fat, then it's fine, but it could have all the sugar in the world, candy, whatever it might be. And when I went to college, my roommates and I from college were still in touch, and we laugh about what we would put in our bodies because this is what it was. Snackwell cookies. I don't know if you ever had those Olestra chips. So I was a nutrition major, so I knew better than to eat those. But my roommates would down those chips. You know what I'm talking about, right? The
Yes,
Olestra,
and
which
then
is
they gave you stomach issues.
stomach issues. I won't even go into detail here to save your, listeners, but it was not pretty
It
seeing
was
what
not
happened.
pretty.
It was not pretty. Just take our word for it. What would happen because you basically were not digesting this fat. So it tasted like a
Exactly.
Dorito, but it didn't digest like a Dorito because that fat just did not digest in your body, and then everyone can picture the rest. So that was the 90s was like all about, high sugar, low fat. And then, we now shifted to a place of knowing that like fats are very healthy for us, or healthy fats that we need to include. So I think depending on the time, there's always been this cycle of what is healthy. What I try to go through with my clients is that there are no foods that you can't have, but there's certainly ones that you want to include more regularly in your diet. You want to include high quality protein, especially if you're 40 and above, right? We start to lose that protein, the lean muscle mass as we age. So we want to make sure we're having good high quality protein to make sure we maintain that lean muscle mass. Very healthy fats, olive oil, omega 3s, those are super important. And then high fiber carbs, right? High quality carbs like quinoa and vegetables and all of these things. This is what we want the basis of our diet to be. And then we have to include real life in there, right? There's going to be occasions where you're going to go out for dinner and you're not going to meet all these marks because it's just not what's available to you, or there's going to be holidays and you're going to eat differently, or you're going to drink a little bit more. And we have to learn how to not overdo it, learn how to balance. It's all about the balance. So if I tell everybody that I work with, if you can meet 80% of the time, meeting that mark of the high quality protein, high fiber, healthy fats, and 20% of the time is your balance where, maybe that includes alcohol and sweets, then that's how you're learning to balance and make this a sustainable way of living. Because if you are doing this 100% of the time, you're not living. And we have to find that, balance.
I like that. Really nourishing up front as much as we can, and then having that life factor. Yeah, because there's always going to be a date night or a birthday, or, you just happen to be somewhere and you can't get the food that you would really like to have. Maybe you're in the airport or something. And there's so much shame and guilt that comes with it. And I'm curious, speaking of, this age group, and I'm in it. I grew up with some rules, and my mom and I laugh about it now, but, the Clean Plate Club and things like that are really hard to change when you have, for your entire life, felt like you can't leave things on your plate, or the scarcity mode. Some women might have this, feeling of they have to eat it all now. For some reason, they can't leave it behind. What kinds of things are you seeing with women in their like 40s, 50s, and 60s that are holding them back because of just the rules that they grew up with?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think what you said is so true. How we grew up around dinner time food and what our mothers or fathers, showed us the example they were uh, makes such a difference. And I also grew up in the clean plate club because it was, got to clean your plate before you go upstairs. And that was part of it. You have to finish. And I think we've now learned, and I certainly learned with my kids, that you you eat until you're full, and that might mean that you finish your plate one night, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every night you're going to clean your plate, and that's okay. So I think it's very hard having grown up with that mentality and that, understanding that I have to clean my plate. That becomes something that you carry with yourself into your 40s even. And I do have a lot of women who it's habitual where you sit down and whatever, no matter how big of a plate you're served, in your mind, you're going to finish it because that's just what you know. And I think it's very hard to break that, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. So, for example, if we talk a lot about real life situations, like I mentioned before, going out to eat being one of them. Well, when you go out to eat for most places, the serving sizes are going to be a lot bigger than if you're just cooking for yourself at home, generally speaking. So, I recommend to my clients to take breaks, to take actual like timeouts without making it obvious, right? Because usually you're with other people, but to take, somewhere halfway through your plate, just take a break and drink some water, engage in conversation, move away from the center of the food for just a few moments, anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, to really assess how you're feeling. It's very possible that after going through that half of a plate, you might feel satisfied, you might feel full, you might not, but you would never know unless you actually took that time out to stop and assess. If you're still feeling not satisfied, you're in control, right? You're the only one who has the green light or red light to tell you to stop or finish eating. But you can't just go and be automatic about it. It has to be more of a mindful behavior. So taking that actual break can help you. And I say if you're halfway through and you're feeling satisfied, just wrap it up. It doesn't mean that later on that night or the next day you enjoyed your food. Great, it's there for you. But a lot of times I think we're just completely plow through because it's habitual, it's what we've been taught. And then physically, sometimes we don't feel well afterwards because we really just have overeaten. And taking those mindful moments, those breaks, are super helpful to break that habit of just plowing through the plate and just because that's just what you were taught and what you know.
Oh, that is so true. So many of our habits around food are very habitual, and we do a lot of the same things over and over again. So let's talk about feeling full, because there is a feeling full that's comfortable that some women are not comfortable with, and they have a hard time feeling comfortable with even a little bloating or feeling full. How do you help women understand that? We're talking about the really overly uncomfortable, I have to unbutton my pants full.
Mhm.
Do you have women like that that are struggling, that they don't feel like they should, have a little bit of, distended tummy, and I'm not talking like major, like there's something wrong or we have
Yeah.
something digestively or gastrointestinally wrong. How do you deal with that?
So we work a lot on mindful eating skills, and the way we do it is through food journaling. So, what I have my clients do, I have them log as best as they can what they're eating throughout the day. It's twofold. It helps with accountability, right? So if you're going to eat it, you're writing it down. They know I'm seeing these journals regularly. Again, there's no judgment whatsoever involved. So it's not like, oh my gosh, I can't write this down. Allison's going to see it. She's going to think that I'm so bad. No, I tell them right from the beginning, this is not judgment. This is just for us to learn from, what's going on and kind of problem solve and see what's being, working really well for you also. But another thing, in addition to writing down what they're eating, there's a place for them on these journals to log before they eat how hungry they're feeling. So let's say it's a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being that you're starving, like you'll eat the whole refrigerator, right? We've all been there. It's like a really like crazy, you're starved. So, and then there's one where you're not hungry at all. So ideally before a meal, I tell everybody that you should be somewhere around like 7, 8, that you're hungry, you're feeling ready to eat, but you're not starved, right? Hunger is a natural feeling. Our body is like communicating with us, like, fuel me, it's time to eat. A lot of times I think people are scared of being hungry. They try to like press that down, especially if they're trying to lose weight, like ignore it, ignore it, ignore it. And then they ignore it, and then they get to the 10. And then when they get to the 10 on the hunger scale, it's like, oh my God, I can't, there's no chance you're gonna make good choices then, because you're just so starved, understandably. On the flip side, when you talk about fullness, what I try to have everyone do is they get a meal plan to start. It's customized to them, to their nutrition goals. So when they first start off, I really try to have them, as best as they can, follow the combination of the foods I've given them, in addition to the serving sizes. I always tell them, this doesn't mean this is the end point. That doesn't mean, you can only eat this, but we're going to start here, and we're going to constantly be making changes and seeing how things go. But to start off here, I tell them, follow the plan as best as possible. Wait 10 minutes after you're done eating, because that's really like the time it takes for your brain to get the message that your stomach is full. Um, give yourself those 10 minutes, and then assess how full you're feeling, right? Because if we're assessing fullness also, 10 being that you're like at that point where you're like feeling somewhat uncomfortable, you want to unbutton your pants, that like can be physically uncomfortable. So we want to try to be somewhere, the sweet spot of somewhere also around like a 7 or 8, that you're feeling satisfied, you're feeling full without feeling like, oh my gosh, my stomach hurts and I really overdid it. And it's not perfect, right? Some days you're really going to get it well, other days not. And it's just a matter of practicing, like anything else, like any other mindful practice, is really just practicing this over and over again, and realizing that you are able to kind of be more intuitive with how hungry and how full you're feeling. And then to your point, we speak a lot about bloating, and like you said, is bearing anything that there's nothing GI wise going on. Being a little bloated after you eat is somewhat, it's somewhat normal. It will go away once your food digests. So I think there's a balance between not overdoing it and feeling so stuffed, and also dealing with a normal digestive process that comes along. And every now and then some bloating comes along with that.
That is a great explanation. I think it's really challenging for women who have not eaten mindfully in the past to really slow down and take that time with their food. There's such an urgency that happens with food for all of the emotional reasons. And you were talking, I love how you talked about hunger. And we know when we're hungry, there are very, very physical signs to that we don't want to let go too far. Because there's two things that happen with that. Not only are you so hungry that you might eat everything, or you pass that hump and you're not hungry and you're like totally depleting yourself. So it does catch up later. But the other side of that too is the emotional side, and finding that, what is it during the day that's making you give up that opportunity. And I love what you just said, that give up that opportunity. Is what I mean by that is give up that opportunity to really slow down and think, because something else has been happening throughout the day that we're not aware of. And you said not being perfect is okay, because we are a work in progress. And just like you said at the beginning, there's so much all or nothing with food that when we fall off, we go completely off sometimes. So let's talk about the emotional side of this, because when women are talking to you, we had talked a little bit offline how there's so much more that they're sharing with you. It's not just about the food. It's not the intake. It's not the robotics. That's what, just eating and dieting is. It's robotic. We're basically outsourcing our eating and our pleasure to a diet. What kind of emotional things are coming up for women who are 40 and above, and they're trying to deal with food, but there's that underlying part of it?
Sure, there's so much, I think, specifically for women. I think just regarding that like hunger piece, I think this is generally speaking that women are just we're overloaded. We're overloaded with things. We're juggling so much that if one thing is going to go, it's going to be something that's going to be something for us rather than for our kids or our parents or our job. It's always going to be, taking care of myself, generally speaking, that's going to be the one that goes by the wayside. And a lot of times it's eating healthy or exercising for women, especially again, as they're juggling a million different things. So I think from an emotional perspective, there's so many different things. It's part of that as being like the main caregiver and just feeling overwhelmed with life. And how can I possibly carve out that time for myself to actually prepare something for myself? And, how can I take those 5 minutes and sit down and have an actual dinner when I have to feed my kids and I have to bathe them and I have to get back to work or whatever it might be? I'm going to just eat their leftovers or I'm going to eat standing. And we all know that those things really take away from the mindful behavior of eating because you're multitasking and you're just shoving it in. You're not really paying attention, but you don't find that you have that time for yourself to be able to prepare something for yourself. A lot of times people have that obstacle of, well, I think I have to prepare something that's quote unquote diet friendly and my family's never going to eat that. And I really try to explain to women that, it's not diet food. This is not about eating cottage cheese and boiled chicken all day long, right? You can find balance and also food that your kids like to make your life easier. So I really do spend a lot of time customizing it to see where these women are at and what they're able to do. Meaning I'm not going to give a woman who is only able to cook 3 times a week 5 different recipes to cook dinner. That's just setting her up for failure. So really focusing on meeting them where they're at, but also making sure that they are carving out that time for themselves and prioritizing themselves. I think again, from the emotional perspective, it's that feeling of overwhelm. And then that feeling, like you were saying, of trying to be perfect. Right. I think I'm certainly guilty of this, right? You want to do everything, right? Like last night, my son is going away for the summer tomorrow. And so I wanted to have like a nice family dinner tonight, but we have 10 minutes to do that. We have 10 minutes to make it a nice family dinner because my other son is a basketball game. Other one is a college night. And then I'm working until like 5 and we have to leave at 6. So all I'm stressing out is how am I going to make a nice dinner in between all these different things? So I'm doing that to myself, right? Everyone would be fine if I just like ordered something in and we can sit around for 15 minutes, whatever it is. But in my mind, I'm trying to make it perfect. And I think when we don't achieve what we think needs to happen, we feel guilty and we just say, oh, forget it. I can't do it. So I might as well not even try. When I think if we try not to be perfect, but we try just the best we can and try to prioritize and simplify our lives, then that would just really make everything easier. But I think women in general really are trying to juggle a lot. They're trying to be perfect. They think it's all or nothing. Like either they're doing it or they can't do it at all. There's no happy medium and balance. It's something I certainly struggle with. And I think it makes all these things tie into the emotions of eating because we're just dealing with this on a daily basis.
Yes, and I'm dealing with it too. I mean, my kids, I only have 1 out of 4 still at home, and we never see him, but I know he's alive because I see Chick-fil-A wrappers in the trash can.
All right, sign of life.
So, yeah, that's just kind of where he is right now at 20 years old.
Yeah.
But I still, even for my husband, is trying to make sure that we are eating well because we like to. And it's funny that you and I both, this is our jobs. We help people with habits and you're helping them with the food side of this. And, we still, even ourselves, find that it can be a struggle. But the beauty in that is we empathize with all you ladies. We understand the overwhelm.
100%. We
And
understand the struggle. It for
yes.
certain it's real. It's real. And another thing I see from an emotional perspective is that when women finally have that time to themselves, they want to decompress. And a lot of times that decompression time is tied into food because food is comfort. So they want to relax, they want to decompress, and I'm finding a lot at night, like let's say once the things are settled down, work is done, the kids are sleeping, you have a few minutes to yourself. That's when a lot of times at night snacking is going on, even if they're not hungry. It's just that feeling almost like a reward system. Like I made it through this day, I survived, and I'm going to reward myself. And we talk a lot about that and figure out like, yes, you made it through the day. You should have that. You need that time to decompress, but let's see how we can not tie it to food. Let's tie it to something else that still makes you feel like you're unwinding.
Oh, that's so good because it's true that decompression time, they're watching their show and they're, coping with the day and coming down. And that's also a habit because once we get that feel good, once we get that dopamine hit, our body knows and it can anticipate that it wants that. Every night it's a pattern coming home. And my old pattern was coming home before I became a health coach. I was a high school math teacher and I would come home, drop my bag full of papers that I had to grade, and I would go straight to the pantry. It was almost like, all right, I made it home. I have more work to do later, but I'm going to take care of myself with food. And the other thing you were talking about with overwhelm makes me think about the amount of cortisol that is happening with us all day. And that when we're jumping that cortisol all the time too, it makes it more likely that we are going to reach for the food that is not necessarily when they're really stressed out reaches for broccoli and spinach. So it's
True. It's comfort food. You want something that's going to comfort you and calm you. And like
yes.
you said, unfortunately, broccoli and spinach just don't do the job.
Mhm.
So that's when we really spend time. And I know you do the same, talking about ways that you can find calm without relying on food, whatever it might be, whether it be talking to a friend, going for a walk, watching a show, taking a bath, all these different behaviors to try to institute in your life besides turning to food. And I tell people, give yourself permission. This is not a perfect science. You're not going to one day all of a sudden be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, let me call a friend, or let me read a book. These are patterns that you've been doing for years and really wiring these behaviors around this. It's going to take time to rewire your brain to think in a different way. So being patient with yourself is certainly something that we talk about a lot. And you're
I
going to mess up
love
because we're
that.
human and we're not robots and we're not perfect.
Yes, and I love that and giving yourself that grace. Thank you for really bringing that up. I have a question that I ask a lot of experts because everyone has a different thought process on it. But with you working with women in the age group that we're talking about, 40s, 50s, 60s, what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting? And do women bring that to you and say, I see this all over the internet? What should I do? Should I incorporate that? And how do you feel?
So that's a great question. I do get that a lot, because I get that a lot with a lot of different diets. Let's just say, like, Judy at work is trying this and she's so successful on it. And I said, that's great. I'm so happy for Judy, but like, let's think about you and what works for your lifestyle. So, okay, that's my dog. Hold on. I just have to
That's
open the door
okay.
for him.
That
Sorry.
is
He's just going to keep
fine.
at it until I open it. Goodbye. He wants to be part of the podcast. Sorry about that. Um, so I would say that I get a lot of questions regarding specific diets. Now, intermittent fasting is one that studies have shown can be a very effective way to drive fat loss. I don't usually ever start with intermittent fasting, unless someone is coming to me already doing it and having had success with it. But I have transition people to intermittent fasting if they just weren't seeing the success on being in just a general caloric restriction, eating, their usual structured eating, whatever, 8 p.m. So I have transitioned people and they've had a lot of success. Now, there's a specific subset of clients that have success with it. It's a lot of times women who have PCOS, women who have insulin resistance. They seem to respond very, very well to intermittent fasting. And I tell them, this is not a fad. This is not something that you're going to do to quickly lose the weight and then go back to your old way of eating. If you're going to take this on, this is something you really have to be consistent with as best as possible. Now, of course, there's going to be days where you're going to start eating before 11 or 12 and you're going to eat later, right? That's obvious, that's going to happen. But generally speaking, on a regular basis, we need to be consistent with it in order to keep the benefits of fasting, because it's not just the caloric restriction at that point, it's the actual fasting that's driving the fat loss. So I make that clear because I'm not about the fad diets. I'm not about like trying something to get to your goal and then, going back to the old ways, because what was the point of all of that? But I have seen a lot of success with it, and it's not my starting point with most people, but it doesn't mean that I'm certainly not willing to give it a go.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that, because what you're really saying is everyone's different, and you really kind of evaluate and assess what's going on before you go down that road. It's not just hey, we're just going to go straight here and do it. And I'm finding too with women who are perimenopausal, they tend to struggle more with it
Mhm.
than people who are women who are postmenopausal or haven't hit perimenopause. And that might be because of, all the hormonal changes. Who knows what's going on? But what I love that you connected to it is the insulin resistance, because
Mhm.
we know that we are becoming more and more insulin resistant as we get older. And everyone who's trying to lose weight is losing that muscle mass also at the same time. So I'm going to bring you to another topic that I'm very curious on your thoughts, because right now the weight loss drugs are so big, right? And I have clients, I know you probably have had clients too, that either have been on them, they've come off and gained the weight back, or they are wanting to go on them and want some thoughts about it. And I'm curious, just if you're dealing with that with women and helping them. And I know we can't really predict a long term, but if you have any thoughts on where do you think this is going? Is this going to be kind of, is it going to be kind of a diet? Is it going to be helping people? What's happening here?
So, yes, it's a very hot topic right now. And it's a great question. So, I think there's a place for these weight loss drugs. There is a definite place for them. There's a need for them, right? There are certain people who have struggled their entire life, yo yo dieted, who are truly obese and have diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. They have all these comorbidities of obesity that down the road, as this just keeps going, they are going to be dealing with all these comorbidities. So if they take these drugs and really lose a good percentage of their weight, and what we're finding is that a lot of their hemoglobin A1C comes down, their fasting sugars come down, all their lipid panel is much improved, then these are people who truly benefit from these drugs. Now, that being said, you need to stay on them, right? If you go off of them, you're going to gain the weight back. Studies have shown that. That's just not my opinion. That's just studies have shown that, right? Because as we know, they're a huge appetite suppressant. People can barely eat on them, right? If you speak to anyone on it, they're telling you they're eating a fraction of what they were eating before. They physically can't. Once they go off of them, their appetite goes back to what it was. The issue is, I find, number one, if you go off of them, you're going to gain the weight back. You're supposed to be meeting with a health coach, a dietitian, to help you with lifestyle changes. It's very hard to institute effective lifestyle changes when your appetite is so depressed, meaning that it's hard to mimic real life when you don't have an appetite, right? Some of the things I go through with my clients, I'm sure you do with yours, is again, all this mindless eating, emotionally, all these things. They're not experiencing that because they cannot eat how they did. So you can't really work through these big issues because they're not experiencing these issues. I'm not saying they're not feeling emotions. I'm saying they just can't eat in response to them like they used to. So I think from a long-term perspective, this population, this obese population that have all these comorbidities, they can really benefit from them if they stay on them long term. Now, we don't know like long term what that looks like, right? So everyone's saying it's safe and effective now, but there are no long-term studies to see if you stay on them for the rest of your life, if they're safe, right? Like fen was safe also until it wasn't. So I'm really hoping that doesn't happen with, let's say, Ozempic, because like I said, it's so effective. Another issue, an issue I have is that there are a lot of people who are on them who don't necessarily qualify for them. And they're on them because they want to lose, the 10 pounds. And, you know, that's not a long-term solution. They will lose the 10 pounds. They definitely will. But once they go off of it, and these people should go off of it, they'll gain it right back. So again, it's sort of like just a quick fix for that subset of the population. But I don't think it's going anywhere. I think this is going to be around forever. And I think, like I said, there are people who are going to benefit from it if they stay on it long term. But again, we don't know the risk factors of being on that long term. And there are side effects, right? We can't ignore the side effects. And a lot of people on them are truly have been struggling their whole life because they're dealing with these side effects on a daily basis of feeling nausea and wanting to eat, but sitting down and not being able to eat more than 2 bites. And eating is an enjoyable part of our lives, right? I think, can all agree upon that. And they're willing to deal with those side effects versus go off of it because they just hated being so overweight that they're willing to every day deal with this nausea and, all these side effects. And I think that says a lot for the struggle people really feel who are overweight.
Yes, I agree with you. This is just the beginning, and this is not going anywhere. And there's so many more companies that are jumping in, and we're finding more generics out there. And I think it's for those people who have struggled for a long time, and they definitely, if they have the blood sugar issues, and that's obviously originally what it was made for. But when you are really obese, you are most likely having some major insulin resistance. And I think you explained that really well. There's a place for it, and it's really helpful. But I think it's also a real challenge. And it's funny because amongst my friends and other health coaches, we joke about the Beverly Hills housewives type people who are jumping on it for that last 5 or 10 pounds. But it's no different. And you described this really well because it's really no different than another diet where you lose the weight and then it's going to come back. If we're not taking care to really change the lifestyle. I think the other thing that I worry about is people who are losing weight quickly like that are also losing muscle. And we know that muscle is so important and we're feeding, you talked about this before about, having that protein and, really, keeping that muscle as we get older. I appreciate your thoughts on that. I just love to ask everybody because it is such a hot topic and it isn't going anywhere. And just to know your thoughts is fun. I really appreciate that. But they're very intelligent thoughts. So thank you. I
My
appreciate that.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Um, yeah. So I also wanted to really quickly, as we're kind of wrapping up here, you have so many amazing ways of working with people and sharing how to get going on their health, how to lose that weight, but in a very flexible and very healthy way so that they can sustain those results. And so let's say there's someone listening today and she's out there and she's like, wow, I really just would like to get started. What are your top 3? And you can repeat yourself or you can come up with new things or reword it. But and I know there's probably 10, but what are your top 3 things that somebody can just get started looking at, thinking about, or doing?
Okay, great question. So, number one, I would say is food journaling. Now, it doesn't have to be like, remember, we're not striving for perfection here. We talked about that earlier. If you just keep in your kitchen or on your phone, even because most of us have our phones for better or worse, always with us, just to build some accountability and mindfulness with the eating. So, writing down just generally what you're eating. And remember, the key is not to place judgment on here. This is a learning tool, not a judgment tool. So writing down what you're eating just to bring awareness to it, because I bet you if you're going to write things down and you're really going to stick to it, there's going to be times when you're going to be like heading to the pantry and you're like, oh, I'm going to write this down. So wait, am I hungry even? Do I want this? So it's going to bring that accountability piece in. And then like we were talking about before, think about how hungry you're feeling beforehand. And if your body is hungry, you should be eating. It's time to respond to that hunger. But on the flip side, if you're not feeling any hunger and it's just, bored, stressed, whatever it might be, comfort, habitual, tell yourself, you know what? I'm not even feeling hungry right now. I'm going to step away. And then write down in your journal, went to the pantry because I was feeling stressed. So you can kind of make this association with guess what? Like when I'm stressed, I go to the pantry. I might not even realize I'm doing it because I've been doing this my whole life. But now I'm writing it down. That's what's so powerful about a journal, right? Not just a food journal, but journaling in general is really just bringing awareness to the behavior. So now you're realizing it. So you can make the connection. And instead, over time, as recognize that you're doing this, you can say, all right, I'm feeling stressed. Instead of turning to the pantry, let me try to find another behavior that can kind of calm my nerves or something that's going to be more productive than heading to the pantry. So that's one, is kind of keeping that loose food journal. And again, for journaling in general, I think is a very powerful tool outside of food as well. Second is move your body in a way that feels good for you, right? So it doesn't have to be running. If running's for you and you love it, amazing. I personally don't enjoy running. So like, as much as that might be the most cardiovascular superior thing to do, like I don't enjoy it. And I'm not going to do it because I don't enjoy it. But I really love doing yoga. I love, riding the Peloton. So these are things that I enjoy doing. So I'm going to more likely stick with it. I love walking. So pick a behavior, a movement that you really enjoy, even if you feel like it's not the most cardiovascular that your friend is doing, or maybe you did when you were 15, but it's something you enjoy, and do it consistently. And walking is a great place to start, and just move your body in a way that feels good for you consistently. So that would be my second bit of advice. And my next bit of advice is trying to meal plan at a I'd say level that feels good for the amount of time you have. So that doesn't mean that you need to spend 4 hours in the kitchen prepping food every week. It means think about your week. Are you bringing lunch to work? Are you working from home? What can you do that will enable you to include more vegetables in your day? Include even lunch. Some of us, as especially women, as we're plowing through the day, we just skip that, meal altogether because we haven't prepared for it. We're racing through the day from work to the kids to the meal prep, dinner prep, whatever. So what can you do that's going to help you set you up for more success and more regular meals? And again, meet yourself where you're at. Don't set your expectations and the goal to be that you're going to, prep 4 or 5 dinners when right now you're only doing one. Meet yourself where you're at and set a realistic goal, but trying to include more meal prep so your meals are when you're overwhelmed and when you don't find yourself with a lot of time, if you have the food available, you're going to be more likely to go ahead and have a good meal if it's already in the refrigerator, even partially done for you.
Those are awesome tips.
Thank
And
you.
I love it. And I love how you talk about food journaling, because getting that hunger scale, talking about the feelings, it's not just about the food and overeating and feeling like, oh, I put too much food on there. It's really the whole big picture. And then moving your body. And I love that, because we do all have different ways that we love to move. And I think we put ourselves in a box where if we don't like something, then we do nothing. And walking is free and easy. So I like
For
that
sure.
too. And I do love
Especially,
running, by the way. So I
I
laugh
know
when
you
people
do.
say that.
I know you do.
And I want to be a yogi. It's just not happening.
You know what? And I want to be a runner and it's just not happening. But you know what? That's okay.
That's
Like,
okay.
that's okay. I think that's the point. It's like when I was
Yeah.
younger, it like had to be running or nothing. Like that was it.
Yeah.
Because that was like the elite exercise that was going to burn the most calories. But now I realize like my body doesn't feel great when I run. Like and walking to me is
Mhm.
just much more enjoyable. And guess what? Like walking is great too. Running is amazing. I'm not knocking running at all. Honestly, I'm envious of you that you can do it and you can do it regularly and your body doesn't hurt you when you do it. But I think everyone has to find what works for them and make it consistent. And I think a lot of people don't start because they feel like, oh, walking, that's not doing much, I should be running, but like, no, you just need to really be moving your body regularly.
And I love that. I used to be the walking snob, and I think it is one of the most amazing things mentally and physically. And I love your last one about the meal prepping, the meal planning is, start where you are and also doing what works for you. Because honestly, I used to be that girl that could do the Sunday meal prep and knock out a few lunches. But to be honest, by Wednesday, I didn't want to eat what I made. And then the second part of that is it was easier just to overcook, not overcook like it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
hard as a rock. Cook more of my dinner so that I had some left over for lunch. So I love that you're saying, hey, do it the way that works for you. And there's some people that may actually have to go with one of the healthy meal preps for a while until they
Yeah.
can get in there.
Absolutely. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. I'm all about convenience. And all of us are, like we said before, juggling more than we can handle. And if you can do anything that's going to make your life easier, like buying vegetables cut up or buying, a salad for lunch and you have leftover protein from dinner and putting it on, or you're making yourself sandwiches and people think, oh my God, I can't eat a sandwich. Yes, you can eat a sandwich. So finding those things that really just make your life easier. I'm all about simplicity and finding that point where we don't have to overcomplicate things. And unfortunately, nowadays, there's so much information overload and so much of it is misinformation. And people are confused, they're overwhelmed, and they're paralyzed because of it. So I think a lot of what we do is tearing apart what really is truth and what is effective versus all those other things that would kind of just make us paralyzed and not do anything because we're just like so overwhelmed with all the information.
Yes, and I really appreciate you bring it back to the basics for us, and you bring it back to not having guilt and shame around food, and I so love that. Alyson, I would love for you to share with everyone, where can we find you?
Awesome. So you can find me on Instagram at Alyson Small Nutrition. It's Alyson. So Alyson Small Nutrition. My website is alysonsmallnutrition.com. And those are the best places to find me. Yeah, that would be, I appreciate it. So appreciate you having me on. I've had so much fun speaking with you.
It's been a great conversation. I know there's so much more we can get into. So at some point, we may have to do that. And
Would love
I
it.
will make sure to put that in the show notes for everyone so they can just click on it and go straight to you. And when this episode goes live, we'll also make sure we tag you so everybody can find you. And Alyson, thank you so much. I have just had such a great time. I could talk about this all day with you. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
And everyone out there, make sure you nourish your entire life and give yourself grace today. That's it. Thank you so much for tuning into the Emotional Eats podcast, the podcast that's here to help you feel amazing, strong, energetic, and healthy holistically in your mind and your body. But my guest and I also want to help you build great habits to help you with long-term mental and physical health so that you can lean into aging in a very positive and strong way. Check out my website, kimhines.com, and please come see me on Instagram at kimhineshealth. That's where I leave tips for healthy life, healthy body, healthy relationship with food, and I also am there to encourage you, and I love to hear from you. So tag me and let me know what you like about the show and what you want to hear more about. Check out the show notes for all the details. Make sure to rate and review the podcast. And until our next time together, nourish your entire life and give yourself grace today.